So let's go ahead and get started. First off, let's quickly take a look at the series for the month of March here. So March is focused on SOLIDWORKS PDM, the whole product line. And today, like we said, we're going to be talking about PDM Standard and Professional, just kind of like a high-level overview of what it does and what it can do for every organization, no matter what industry you're kind of focused on. The next few Fridays that we have here, the next couple of Fridays, will be focused more on those of you who are already an administrator for SOLIDWORKS PDM. Today would be more focused on anyone that's currently an administrator or not one yet, but thinking about pursuing a PDM solution. So next Friday, we'll talk about how to use revision tables in SOLIDWORKS PDM, because the way SOLIDWORKS PDM works with the typical SOLIDWORKS built-in revision tables it's not really intuitive in that sense. So we'll kind of discuss how you would set it up in SOLIDWORKS PDM so that all of your metadata is driving that whole revision table through your normal workflow process. The Friday after that, we'll talk about how you can take your SOLIDWORKS PDM experience to the next level. So definitely keep an eye out for those registration dates, and then you can definitely learn a lot more as we go through those webinars. You can also see on our website here, you take a look at hawkersys.com under our events. You can see those webinars there. So same way you register for this webinar, you can register for those next two webinars that are upcoming. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So the outline for today, we'll do a brief introduction. I'll just go over some basic functionality of what SOLIDWORKS PDM will do for a company. So we're not going to focus on anything too specific or anything in depth, just more of a basic level interview, or not interview, but a view of how it can revision manage your files, how it can protect your files in terms of collaboration, so that when one SOLIDWORKS engineer is working on a file, they're not afraid about someone else overwriting those saves with their own design work. And that's kind of a big headache that a lot of users have. How SOLIDWORKS PDM can inherently protect references when it comes to moving files around inside a folder structure or renaming files, for instance. These are all a lot of common scenarios that users run into all of the time. So we'll kind of talk about how SOLIDWORKS PDM will prevent that. We'll take a quick look at SOLIDWORKS' data management history, so just how it got started with creating a data management product for us and where it's at today. Then we'll look at PDM Standards specifically. Because PDM Standard is a new product, as most of you may know. It was something that was introduced last year in 2016. So it's kind of important for us to go over it again since it's still relatively new. And from there, we can talk about the comparisons between PDM Standard and Pro and how it's limited, dependent on Pro there. After that, we'll talk about ourselves, Hawkers Systems, and how we can be a resource for all of you, and how we can really add a lot of value in terms of us specializing, in this case, our PDM product there. And at the end, like I said, any questions that were asked during the webinar, we'll go ahead and cover those as long as time allows. So again, feel free to type in questions, but we're going to stay focused and on track. So quick introduction. Let's just take a quick look on a user interface of what it will do for any users inside a PDM environment. So most of engineering users, when they first start in, let's say, a file share or using a Dropbox type functionality, or even just saving it locally, right? What kind of challenges do they run into? What kind of issues do they experience? So if I were to just go into my C drive, my local drive, I could be working on a set of SOLIDWORKS files, right? But when I'm saving that, I have to eventually push it to some kind of network share in order to collaborate with any other users inside my company. That kind of process becomes very painful as you're dependent on the network and uploading it to the network and maybe the bandwidth depending on how many other users are doing the exact same thing. Now that process itself is already painful in terms of performance, but what about just capabilities? When you upload files, you're not necessarily confident that you're uploading the correct one, for instance, or maybe you're uploading the wrong revision because you kept multiple copies. That's a common scenario, right? So you get a new revision, you pack and go it, you kind of store it somewhere for future reference. When you go and upload it to a file share for other users to see it, are you grabbing the right one? When they're grabbing it from the file share, are they grabbing the right one? So there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of variables that can happen where user error or even system error just kind of comes into play. Now, with a SOLIDWORKS PDM environment, what this allows us to do here, I'm just gonna log in really quick. You can see already there that I am forced to log into my system. So it already has kind of a layer of protection. So I'm not worried about security issues, for instance. If I'm logging in as an engineer, I will get these engineering permissions. Now, working on a set of files, it's relatively simple. So here's my set of files. And this is what I'm going to be working on. This is just a miter saw. Some of you may have seen this before, in previous demonstrations or presentations. Now, while I'm working with these files, if I wanted to make any sort of change on it, let's say if I go down here, for instance, let's grab this drawing. If I want to make changes to this drawing and update the description, and the description here is all tied into the custom properties, I have to take ownership of it. This transaction with the system of me taking ownership of it locks out this file from all other users. And this is where a lot of the benefits come in from just the core functionality of SOLIDWORKS PDM. So now that I'm logged as admin here, but now that my name is flagged on this file, this causes the system to lock out this specific drawing from any other user in the vault. So if my colleague, let's say Bob White, wants to make changes to the table, he wouldn't be able to until I check in this file again. So right now I can be confident that if I update this description, I'm not going to come back to work the next day and find that my description is now overwritten with a different save that someone used from their local drive. Now the process to uncheck out my name here would be just checking the file back in. So this essentially would take place over your new saving over a file share process. So I'll update this to the server, and now I have a new version for us to use. And now Bob White, if he wants to make a design change on the table, he's more than welcome to. So again, this is just a basic level process. I'm not talking about any specific details here, just showing you a simple process of how this software would protect all of your engineering files. And then from there, we can kind of expand beyond that, how you can revision, manage it, and even streamline it. Now let's talk about the history of SOLIDWORKS PDM, so how it came to this point for SOLIDWORKS. So back when SOLIDWORKS was first released back in 1995, right? It was just a brand new CAD software that they developed, and they were targeting more towards low-end users so that it doesn't require, let's say, extensive computing capabilities, right? Just more on the lower end. Because of that, PDM wasn't the first thing that came to mind for them. They just really wanted to focus on the base SOLIDWORKS program. But from there, as they moved forward from 1995, they realized that engineering companies were just essentially saving all of their engineering files on a local drive and kind of collaborating back and forth that way. And as we all know, that's definitely a painful process. So because they saw this need and all the challenges that the engineering companies have been experiencing, they developed in-house a program called Workgroup PDM, which many of you know. Workgroup PDM was introduced in 2001, and it was just a basic level PDM solution. So it's built on a 32-bit architecture, and that's kind of what was capable at the time. And it had no database, driving in the background. Essentially what's going on is it gave everyone the core checking in, checking out functionality, which is very important. But in terms of metadata, it's essentially pushing actual text files back and forth from the users to the servers and back and forth, right, like that. So you can kind of already tell that the performance with Workgroup PDM starts to become extremely limited because now you're very dependent on the network since these actual files are being sent back and forth. So because of that need, they realized that they needed to have some growth, and that's when Enterprise PDM was introduced in 2006. Enterprise PDM, as we know, is built on a Microsoft SQL server. So that is a full-blown database solution that was provided by Microsoft, right? There's also other, database SQL servers such as Oracle and MySQL, but the one that was developed, that SOLIDWORKS uses is going to be Microsoft. Because it has a database running in the background, this database is live updating all of the metadata and transactions that are occurring inside the vault. And this could be file path, custom properties of your file, all of your users' information, all of the references that are being maintained. That's all being live updated as we work with the vault. So we're going to get extremely good performance and live notifications as things occur. Because of that, we no longer have to worry about pushing text files back and forth to the server. It's going to be just pushing bits of data now. So again, this is why we start seeing a huge performance increase moving away from Workgroup PDM to Enterprise PDM. Now, come to 2016 last year, SOLIDWORKS made a huge change to their PDM suite, right? So Workgroup PDM was officially announced that it would be end of life in 2016. As of now, this year, 2017, will be the last year you can find Workgroup PDM on your installers. Come 2018 next year, you'll no longer have access to that. So this is kind of a great starting point for everyone to start planning how to start moving away from Workgroup if you plan on upgrading all of your environments from 2016 or 2017 towards 2018 when it comes. Now with 2016, they introduced PDM Standard, which is developed to help these companies move away from Workgroup. So shift away from the whole 32-bit environment to a 64-bit environment and move from a non-database format to a database format, okay? SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional, what that is it's just a rebrand of Enterprise PDM. So everyone who's known ePDM in the past, it's just now PDM Pro, okay? So let's take a quick look at Standard here. So what is PDM Standard? So, and many of you may have seen this webinar from last year as well. It was covering the same information about introducing PDM Standard and what it meant for a lot of companies. So it's a scalable data management solution for small groups. It was kind of catered towards for those 1 to 3 man shops as they start growing towards these 5+ engineering teams, right? Why is it scalable? Well, it's built on kind of the same architecture as PDM Pro or ePDM. So the key feature here is it's built on a SQL Server Express database. So remember, PDM Pro or ePDM was built on Microsoft SQL Server Standard. So it's the full-blown solution of it. They limited PDM Standard by giving the light version that Microsoft offers, which is SQL Server Express. Now the limitations here in terms of performance is SQL Server Express is limited to 1 GB of RAM. If those of you who have experienced a Microsoft SQL Server before, maybe with a PLM system or a CRM system or your ERP system, you know that it requires its own dedicated database for the most part because it's a memory hog program. It's very RAM intensive. So this is one of the biggest ceilings that your company will definitely hit off the bat. The kind of the baseline model that we like to follow or recommend as best practice is if your company is between or below 5 users, so between 1 to 4, you can definitely get away in using PDM Standard using the SQL Server Express database in terms of performance. But once you start hitting 5+ users, that performance will start to show a lot more because you're having more concurrent usage, you're hitting that 1 GB of RAM. Because remember, this database server, it's live updating and running all of these transactions all of the time. So we definitely want to be aware of that. I'll talk about some more limitations later as we discuss the comparison. So let's kind of move on here. The whole point of discussing SQL Server Express is that the upgrade path is definitely there, and that's why it's scalable. If you start with PDM Standard and you choose to move to PDM Pro, because they're built on the same SQL Server, it's simply just a quick upgrade and you have access to PDM Pro. Same thing with the architecture and UI. It's the same consistency here because it's built on the same backbone and it's using the same front-end interface. As a user, when you upgrade from PDM Standard to PDM Pro, you're not worried about, oh, are my users going to require 2 or 3 more months of training just to learn this new PDM environment? If that's going to be the case, it typically causes a lot of companies to be hesitant to upgrade. This won't be the case here. The interface is exactly the same. The Windows-based user interface you saw earlier will be the same for both products. So there's no worries about intensive user training and upgrading and having to redo that user training. Version and revision control. One of the biggest headaches a lot of workgroup customers experienced was having to worry about the revision management when they move away from Workgroup PDM to PDM Pro, or in that case, at that time, ePDM, right? Because PDM Standard and again, PDM Pro are using the same architecture, your versioning and your revisioning will be exactly the same. Your history will still be built in. You won't have to wipe and start fresh. It's all going to be built in for you. Essentially what happens is once you upgrade, the features that are available in Pro that weren't available in Standard will just be opened up from the administrative standpoint, allowing your company to take the advantage of all of the extra features that you initially did not have. Lastly, workflow control. So PDM Standard does come with one workflow that you can use. Essentially, this workflow would map out most of your company's processes. When you upgrade to PDM Pro, again, you're not losing that workflow. All those files will still be able to use that same workflow, but you have the capabilities to create more workflows. So if you want to start bringing in maybe your change orders, so all of your ECOs, your spec sheets, your C-drills, any other engineering documentation you want to revision manage, you can start doing that with their own individual approval processes with PDM Pro and not worry about losing any work that way. And lastly, collaboration. From a collaboration standpoint, it's all the same. Everyone's still working with the same UI. Everyone still has the same logins to the same vault. Again, it's the same vault that's just being upgraded. You're not going to be working inside a new vault. So the collaboration is going to be the same. When you upgrade to Pro, you actually improve on your collaboration because you can start adding more users again without worrying about hitting that performance cap. So let's take a look at PDM Standard here. So this is going to be more beneficial for those of you who are already a PDM Standard or a PDM Pro admin, just so you can see what PDM Standard entails. So here is PDM Standard Vault, and just for a quick comparison, this is a PDM Pro Vault. You can see that all it is showing here is that the features that are available in PDM Standard is just a shorter amount than your PDM Pro vaults. They have a lot more features available, but you'll still have access to a workflow. Essentially, this workflow is a flowchart or a lifecycle management solution for you to essentially handle all of your CAD files from a work in process state, so it can get to a production release date at some current revision, right? But you can still add your users, your groups as usual. So the core functionality is all there, and it's kind of what you were experiencing earlier. From a user standpoint, I still have the capabilities to log into my vault like we saw earlier, and I can still browse to my SOLIDWORKS files and open it up. When you open them up, it's going to prompt me in SOLIDWORKS to check out the file, and I can do just that. Now, checking out a file in SOLIDWORKS, again, I'm taking ownership of it. It's blocking that file from any other user inside my vault or my company to overwrite any of my changes. So that's what's happening here. Now, while that's opening up, let's just take a quick brief look at the Windows Explorer interface. So this Explorer interface is open for all users within the vault. So PDM Standard is not limited to just your engineering users. You can have other users such as your management team or your document control team, your marketing team, all have access to this central repository. It's open for any type of users. Because it's a Windows-based format as we see here, you can create any file types inside the vault and the vault will take care of it. So keep that in mind as you start thinking about moving towards this PDM environment. Now within this Windows-based solution, again, PDM Pro and PDM Standard, it's all going to look the same here. I can look at my files. You can see there's a data card attached to all of my files here as I click on them. These data cards essentially are mapping out metadata that's being written on my SOLIDWORKS custom properties. So this number here, this description, and the estimated weight, these are all custom properties that are being pushed down to this data card. Now this functionality goes both ways. So there is bi-directional communication. As an engineer, and a lot of engineers would share this the same sentiment, but everyone does not like inputting data twice, right? Or even 3 times. We don't like punching in some part number once here, once there, go to the ERP system, punch it there, because it becomes a headache and it's very time consuming. In this case, if I punch in my part number, my description here, it will push that information to my custom properties for SOLIDWORKS, right? So if I go to my SOLIDWORKS custom properties here, let it load for a bit, and you can see a description, and that same part number shows there. If I were to update that description or the part number within this custom properties tab or even the tab builder, that change would push down to the data card as well. So again, we don't have to worry about multiple data entries here. From a user standpoint, there's also this preview tab that you can take advantage of. So again, all of this functionality down here on the bottom half of the screen is just extending your standard Windows capability. So off the bat, you can see just browsing is very convenient. You have all of this metadata for you to view in order to increase and make your browsing experience a lot more efficient. Now with this preview window, I can actually orbit this entire 3D assembly. I can zoom in and out. I can even do an exploded view if needed. So this could be maybe potentially helpful for your shop floor, right? So if you commonly push out these files, these assembly files or e-drawing files to your shop floor so they can see what's going on, that's beyond the PDF itself, this could be one of those helpful solutions. Versioning. So again, PDM Standard doesn't have any special versioning in comparison to your PDM Pro environment. With versioning, now you can start having a history that starts being built up within your PDM environment. Now this PDM Vault standard of mine is kind of new. If I show you my PDM Pro Vault, one of my PDM Pro Vaults here, one that actually has history built in, you can see that the audit trail is going to be there. And this capability is available for both vaults. But you can see all of the users and all the different versions as they worked on a specific file. And these comments also help every user display their design intent to the rest of the team. That way, if they ever need to check in history what was going on to a design or a reason why things were being changed, these comments will definitely help everyone understand how a specific revision, for instance, was approached. So this is definitely very helpful. So again, with the history built in, this is already showing capabilities that are way better than being on a shared drive, right? In order to create a quote-unquote history on a shared drive or a Dropbox, you're constantly doing pack and goes to store them somewhere to have for reference in the future. Now, the pain for pack and goes is that you have to rename them as well, right? If you pack and go a set of files somewhere and you repeat that process without renaming the output file, you essentially have the same name over and over again. And that's going to lead into a lot of different issues in terms of rewriting files and reference issues. In this case, you kind of avoid that because it's all built in. As a user, you check in files, and then that updates the version for you. So your history is being built for you without you having to do extra work there. With PDM, you also get the capabilities of creating these quote-unquote bill of materials. So this is a great way to just kind of kickstart your bill of material management. So those of you who have to deal with bill of materials in terms of doing them in Excel sheets or maybe even a third-party system, this could be something to look into. Now, there is limitations to bill of material exports for PDM Standard, and we'll kind of talk about that during the comparison. But just for your information off the bat for PDM Standard here, I can actually grab all of this information with the set of custom properties. So these columns here, those are all customized by the admins. So you can set your own set of metadata that you would need typically on a bill of material. And if you export that to an Excel sheet, you can load this up to some other software or push it out to market, or sorry, not marketing, but to purchasing maybe, or to your shop floor, information like that. And the last two, these two tabs, I know from a lot of conversations I've had with other engineering companies, these two tabs in itself could already sell itself, right? Just having the ability to see the scope of your projects downstream as well as upstream is going to be a huge time saver. Being able to just take a look on this assembly and seeing what sub-assembly is being worked on or what parts being edited or modified or what's being used there is going to help a lot of design as you move forward with assemblies, right? Just doing different mates, saying, Bob here is making a change on this lower guard. And well, that's a toolbox part. Let's say this washer, right? He's making a change on the washer. That washer is a part of my sub-assembly, and maybe you're doing these mates to double check the collision detection. You can now be more aware that he's making a change on it, so you don't do any mates that might break the reference there, or because he's making maybe a thickness change on the washer. It doesn't ruin the tolerances for you when you're doing your mates. And then vice versa with the wear and use, right? If we go down to an actual, let's say, downstream part, let's just grab that same washer here. Let's go ahead and look for it. So again, this description is helping me a ton here to find my washer. With that washer, I get a scope upstream. So here I can see all of my top level assemblies that are being affected. And this is great for a number of reasons. One, if I'm just making a general design change, I can see how many files it would affect. And it lets you kind of take a step back and say, oh, if this washer change would affect 10 assemblies, especially top level assemblies, right? I can actually filter that. Then I would maybe want to double check, circle back to my manager and say, hey, I might need a new part number because this is affecting way too many of our top level products. Now, if it's not affecting too much, like in this case, only 2, but what if this washer was only affecting 1 assembly, right? You now have the capability to be more granular with your changes. You know it's only going to affect 1 product line. You can make that decision to only update this part for that specific assembly and then update that assembly with the new part by rebuilding it and not pushing that rebuild change on the other assembly. Or again, have that same conversation is, should we consider a new part number for this? Okay. So again, very helpful tool. And again, this is all kind of built in within PDM. There's no special functionality between this or a PDM Pro environment. Now, working within SOLIDWORKS, same idea. So for all of you who design in SOLIDWORKS, being inside this new PDM environment isn't going to change your workflow drastically where you're going to be kind of worried about, oh, is PDM going to slow me down? Am I going to have to worry about, a whole new interface to work with? That's not going to be the case here. So let's just take a quick look at this miter saw I have opened up, right? So this is my assembly. All I did earlier is you saw I double clicked and I said checkout. That checkout process is the only thing that's new so far, saying that I'm going to take ownership of it. Now, the design change I need to make here, for instance, is just I need to replace this yoke pivot with a different yoke pivot, okay? All I need to do here, again, this could also be a design change as well. I could have just been editing my designs. But what I'm going to do here instead, I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly do a replace component. I'm just going to browse it to the vault to find the new design of it. And again, helpful because this reads in as Windows Explorer. I still get the description and these tabs down here. So if I go ahead and look for a different yoke pivot to replace it with, there's that one there. So I can see a quick preview, even take a look at the data card. I don't need to take ownership because I'm not doing design change. And all I do here is just replace it, right? Let's accept that change. Now, that replace component, again, could have been a design change on a part level. I could have been adding fillets and a bore somewhere to that actual yoke pivot itself, for instance. It doesn't matter. What matters here is the whole idea of the fact that I changed the file locally. So I'm working with this file locally. If I go ahead and save this, let's go ahead and rebuild as well. When I save this, I'm saving locally and I'm not actually communicating with the server. And that's one of the biggest changes in terms of the architecture from a, let's say, a file share standpoint. When you're working with the file on a file share and you open up directly, that save communicates over the network. If the network goes down, you can lead to corruption of the file itself, and you get pretty poor performance if your bandwidth is pretty limited. In this case, I'm saving locally, so I don't have to worry about being dependent on the network, nor do I have to worry about corruption. If something happened to network, it doesn't matter because my file is locally. Now, because my file is local, if you take a look on the right side of my screen here, there's that little special add-on. That add-on for PDM lets me know visually that the file I had locally is now newer because I did a control save, right? Control S. So I did a save on my file and it's more updated than the one that's in the vault. So the system inherently knows that comparison. Because of that, I know that I have to push this update to the server. And all I have to do from an engineering standpoint is just push that change back in, okay? So here's the second step that's new for your workflow, okay? So there I go ahead and check in my file. So that releases this assembly for anyone else who potentially maybe needed to make changes to the assembly. But you can see there that my screen updates and everything's good to go. There's no highlights. For those of you who are worried about like a more collaborative standpoint, all it would look like for them here would be my computer ran out of memory. My apologies for that. My laptop definitely has been running out of memory these past few days. Again, very RAM limited. Just for those of you who don't know, for all of us here at Hawkridge as PDM specialists, we actually host our own Microsoft SQL Server Standard and SQL Express on the same little laptop we work on. So our RAM is definitely very limited there. But essentially all I wanted to show you was that from a collaborative standpoint, all the users would see there is that if they had an older version, the system would kind of tell them that it has a newer version available for them to get. And then with that newer version, they can go ahead and grab that latest and greatest, and it allows them to work with the latest and greatest there. Give me a second here. I'm just checking my RAM usage. Yeah, I'm at 6 gigs. So. Okay, let's move on. So again, that was just the design, kind of quote-unquote design change for everyone to see. Just so you know, it's not going to be different in terms of a SOLIDWORKS user's workflow. Now, let's go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint and take a look at some quick comparisons here. So I typically would take care of questions towards the end, but I saw a good question in there I do want to talk about while we were on that interface there. One of the questions that was just asked is, and I just quickly skimmed this, so let me know if I didn't catch the whole question. But the question was, what search tools are available for PDM Standard? And that's a very valid question to ask. So the search tool that's available is actually the same search tool that's available in PDM Pro as well. But if I click Open Search here in my Windows Explorer view, actually, again, as a new vault, let me make sure that my username has access to that really quick. Give myself permissions there. Okay, let's take a look at that search tool here. So the search tool looks like this up here at the top. And it leverages that same database, the SQL Express database. That Express database essentially indexes all of our metadata for us, so it helps cross-reference all the information that we're looking for here. So with this interface, I can just quickly do a search on my entire vault. If I knew specific information like parts of my part number, right? So I know there's a 10 in there or maybe a 20 in there. I can rerun this search and I'll start limiting my search to only files with a 10 or a 20 in there instead of the file name. I can be more descriptive if I remember bits and pieces of information, like I said, and it starts refining my search even more, right? So they're looking to solve a problem with sourcing common components. So that's definitely a good question. So that search tool will help there. Now, you can do something called like a library folder. So in this case, I have a library folder here. So let's take a look at this, for example. So essentially all I did with my PDM Standard vault here, and you can do the same thing with PDM Pro. I have set up the exact same way for both of my vaults. But in my library folder, you see I have all of my source McMaster car parts. So you're kind of questioning, how would you, and this is an issue that a lot of engineering companies run into, but how would you avoid having multiple McMaster car parts? Because the common thing is, oh, I needed this part from McMaster car, I download it and I throw it into the vault, right? Without even checking if it exists already. One of the things you can do is you can make a special data card for your standard parts and actually have a source number on it. So in this case, I have all of my source McMaster car numbers. So from there, if I looked up the McMaster card number on the website, I said I need this bolt, for instance, or in this case I need this screw, I can go ahead and copy that source number from the website, not the vault here. I'm just doing it from the vault because I don't have it opened up. But actually grab that, go to my specific standard library parts card, find where that source number field located, and just run a quick search on that source number. And it'll show up. If it shows up, I say, oh, it exists in my vault. I don't need to download that file from McMaster car. I'll just point the assembly to here in terms of having the mates. So I see that I have the data card and the preview is right there. Okay, so that was a very, very good question. I hope it answers it for a lot of you other admins or other users out there. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the quick comparison here. So here's a list of comparisons of what you would lose out on if you stick with PDM Standard. And again, PDM Standard works just fine if you're looking for the core functionality. I'm not saying that it's not a good product. It definitely is. But if you want to kind of have extended capabilities such as automation, replication, and customization, you might want to consider looking at PDM Pro. So let's start from the top there. PDM Pro has a lot of automation available. Off of the bat, the data import features was in regards to the bill of material functionality I was talking about earlier. So if you have a third-party system that you need to communicate your bill of material information with, PDM Pro would be something you would want to start to look at. So this could be your ERP system, your MRP system, or a PLM system, right? If you have something that manages your bill of materials, what we would do out of the box for PDM Pro is anytime your assembly gets approved, it'll generate this XML sheet, which looks like HTML, but essentially is a universal data import-export language. And it shoots out all the references with metadata attached to it. And you can actually customize that metadata mapping. So if it's like a description in your custom properties, but maybe your ERP system is like Agile or MySys or something like that, and it reads in a specific data header, like Agile. Maybe I don't actually know what data headers it requires, but for example, let's say it requires Agile - description for its description. You can actually map it out saying, okay, every time it gets approved, map out description to Agile - description, and it'll just kind of create it for you. That XML file, you can output it to, let's say, a network drive. Have that ERP system every, let's say, 2 or so minutes, point to that network drive, see if there's a new XML file, and if there is, go ahead and just import it in. So that's what we can do now. Okay. Let's take a look at automatic document creation. So what we can do in PDM Pro is convert a lot of your files. So essentially off the bat would be SOLIDWORKS. Anything your SOLIDWORKS files can save out as, you can convert that automatically as a part of your workflow process. So let's say every time your drawings get approved. So any of you users right now that don't have a PDM system implemented, I want you to just start thinking about every time all the time it takes for you to convert a drawing to a PDF when you get a new revision on it. That could be like an engineering revision or a production revision. Depends on your process, right? But go ahead and next time you have to do that, just time yourself, right? Okay, we got a new revision. Let me time myself finding my file, opening it up, doing a file save as to a PDF, setting all the options, and then pointing it to wherever it needs to be converted to. That could be a shared drive, a local drive, or something like that. PDM Pro can now automate that entire process. So with PDM Pro, every time your drawings get approved, and only when it gets approved, no other time, it'll find those drawings with a new revision. You can even have like a watermark that clears out of it, and it'll just automatically convert it to a PDF in some location. Okay. And then for other file types, you can see there in the example is step and IGES files, but it could be like your parasolids or STLs. So if you do a lot of dumb solids for, let's say, shop floor, or if you have to outsource it to some manufacturing shop, if they commonly request like a parasolid from you, you can automatically do that same conversion. You can find all of your parts, they get approved, it'll shoot out that same dumb solid for you to send to them. So a lot of time savings there. Lastly, some automation that can occur, and this kind of ties into the bottom half or the bottom of the screen there where it says customization. PDM Pro has access to OpenAPI where PDM Standard does not. With OpenAPI, what that allows you to do is control custom programming, right? It gives you access to callouts for you to create your own written programs for them. Now, if you don't have custom programmers in-house, at Hawkers, we also have a dedicated programming team called Hawk Replications. They do their own software development. Just to show you a quick look on the website. Definitely take the time to browse this if you ever have the chance. It's www.hawkwareapps.com. You can see they have quite a few different custom development programs here. Some of them are free, so take a look at it, and it's kind of already there for you to download and just implement into your standard workflow to help things be more efficient. Okay. All right, let's go back. Let's talk about replication. For those of you who have multiple locations where engineers work out of, so let's say you have a set of engineering teams here in California, but then, in my case, California, but then you also have, let's say, an engineering team in, let's say, New York, right? So there's that time difference, and everyone's using the same vault. With multi-site replication, instead of forcing one of the set of engineers to communicate over the network, you can now start having a local site in both locations. So before 2017, we had access to an archive server replication. What that means is you'll have the file server be local to both teams. That way, when they download files, they don't have to download over the network. They just download locally. With the introduction of 2017, SOLIDWORKS has made some changes where they start allowing database replication. So that's something to look forward to in 2017 here as we move on and as further development on it improves. But there's database replication available. What that means is not only can you have file servers at each local location, but you can start having database servers at each local location as well. So you don't have to communicate to the main SQL server anymore. You can now communicate to your local SQL server. Now, those of you who are in a larger company and do have this multi-site replication already in place, One caveat to that database replication, actually there's two of them, but is you have to have a individual license of SQL Server Enterprise. That does not come with SOLIDWORKS PDM Pro, unfortunately. That's not a contract that SOLIDWORKS has with Microsoft. So you have to have your own copy of SQL Server Enterprise, because that's what allows you to have replication. The second caveat to know about is those local database servers are only there for read access. So it's good in terms of searching and finding files and just having read access to your vault for performance. When it comes to actually writing metadata, such as checking a file back in with new custom properties, that will still communicate with the main server. Okay, so just for those of you who might be interested in that, just so you're aware of it. Now, in terms of when you should replicate, that 5+ users, that's actually kind of an old statement there. We're saying more about 10 to 15 users, which is where it may or may not work, where you kind of wanted to start thinking about doing replication on a larger scale. Okay, but once you start hitting 20+ users in multiple locations, you want to start thinking about replication for better performance. Okay, and last thing you can think about is web server. Now this is under the replication, but it doesn't have to be for replication. It could just be when you want to provide access for external use, such as customers or even vendors, or even your remote users when they're on the road often. So what I want to take a look at here is just kind of displaying how web servers work. So here you get a web portal, and you could just log into your vault as you normally would, and you'll just have access to the same vault as you would experience. Look, it's very similar, right, to a standard vault that we're looking at, except now it's through a web portal. Now, a common misconception here is that, oh, we can create this web portal and just shoot out the link to anyone that might need and use it. One thing I would recommend still from a networking and an IT standpoint is still block this web portal behind a VPN, because you don't want this to become a security leak for your company, okay? So it's definitely great to have external news, but definitely be aware of the security issues it can come with if you don't have a VPN access for it. But what it's great for is it is browser agnostic. So if you have users that, or let's say managers on a MacBook, they don't have to worry about having to run like boot camp, something that's not supported, just to approve something. They can now take a look through, in this case, this web portal on their standard Mac browser. I'm not sure what it is, but then actually look at files and then approve it from there, right? So I can actually go into a set of files. Just grabbing a quick SOLIDWORKS file for everyone to see here. You can actually see a little thumbnail of that file as the preview tab, and even take a look at the data card. And from there, the manager could then approve it, okay? So a lot of capabilities there with that web portal. So definitely think about that if that's something you're interested in. Okay, let's move on to customization. We have about 15 minutes left here, so I'm gonna kind of speed things up. Customization, it's open API, so if you have custom development worries, definitely think about PDM Pro, as you can build custom workflows for, let's say, an add-on or an application that needs to run. You can definitely do something like that. ERP system integration and PLM system integration, kind of mentioning that with the automation, but this is more kind of not out of the box. This would be if you need direct integration with your ERP or PLM systems. So instead of a handshake, you just want a direct connector. Because it's open API, this would now open up that opportunity to do something like that. Lastly, again, this is back to our Hawkware team. If you wanted to have extended bill of material capabilities, they did develop a product that we completed last year, kind of announced it, and it's called XBomb. And XBomb is just kind of increasing the bill of material functionality that PDM has out of the box, and allows you to have live links and updates to multiple bill of material sources within the vault. So this could be your standard assembly, as well as, let's say, an electrical bill of materials from Excel sheets. So if you are interested in a better capability with bill of materials, take a look at the Hawkware apps, and again, it's under XBomb, okay? And again, if you aren't interested in that, let myself know, or let your account manager know, and we can definitely point you to the proper resources. Okay, moving forward, let's talk about replication. Really quick, just so we have further details. Again, PDM Pro has this capability. This is when you want to start thinking about this if you're on a PDM standard environment and you have multiple locations communicating with that. essentially all that's going on here is we have this trusted network, right? This LAN here. This is the common scenario that most of our companies work with. You have two dedicated servers or one dedicated server. It's up to you. But you have essentially the database server with all the metadata, and then the archive server that hosts all of your files. All of your local users communicate with that locally. But when you start having a multi-site replication scenario, you have a wide area network to deal with. With that, you can see that they'll have their own local archive server. And all of those files that are updated here will now replicate to the archive server locally for them to pull from. So if they want to grab a top-level assembly that has thousands of references, they no longer need to download that over this long network here. It'll happen for them automatically. So how does this work on the background? There's two ways it can replicate. There's something called scheduled replication, which would be aimed to occur on off hours. Now, California to New York isn't the best example for this because we don't have that much off hours. But let's say from here to China, or from here to, let's say, Europe, anywhere in Europe, there's more hours for us to work with. So on those off hours, it'll take any updated changes or transactions that occur from one site, and it'll push those transactions on that scheduled off hours to the new location. So that when that off hours location comes into work that next day, they'll see all updated latest versions available. Now, if you have a user from the secondary site that happens to be working long hours or just kind of on off hours, if they happen to grab a file locally that's not updated yet, the system will inherently know that. It'll communicate with the main server and do an on-demand replication, essentially. And it'll take that latest version and it'll communicate with that new replicated server. So no matter what, every user will always be working with latest. But for the most part, you'll get better performance. Here's a quick comparison. You can find the same comparison matrix on our website at hawkridgesys.com. And again, if you have more interest in this comparison list or have more questions about it in detail, any of our PDM specialists or your account managers could definitely help with this information. But kind of off the bat, we can see a lot of the differences here. One of the functionality differences we'll see is SOLIDWORKS compatibility. So with PDM Pro, you can be using SOLIDWORKS 2 major releases back. So if I'm on PDM Pro 2017, I could still have a SOLIDWORKS 2015 add-in interface and be checking in and out to the vault constantly. But with PDM Standard, I have to be on the same version. PDM Standard is limited to one workflow, and that's what we kind of saw earlier with my add-in, or my administration tool. For those of you who are admins currently, you can see that this workflow only has one, but with the PDM Pro Vault, you're not limited to your workflow. You can have multiple workflows in place there. The RAM limitation is what I was talking about earlier, the 1 GB of RAM limit on your PDM Standard because of SQL Express, whereas PDM Pro uses a full-blown Microsoft SQL Server, which allows 128 GB of RAM to use. The database limitation itself is 10 GB of database size. Now that's the SQL Server database itself, so that limitation is not as much of a worry as the RAM limitation itself. Again, we discussed multi-site replication and how that's limited. Functionality-wise, inside the PDM environment, you're limited to 2 revision schemes. Now, there's a lot of confusion with this and what this means. This does not mean that you're limited to only 2 revision letters or revision numbers, because that would be kind of silly. It's limited to your actual scheme itself. So if you have, let's say, an alphabetical revision and then a numerical revision, each of those would be considered its own scheme. So going A to Z, that's a scheme. And then going from 1 to 99, that's its own other scheme. If you had to have a process that maps out, let's say, working revisions or redline revisions that go to alphanumerical, that's where you'd be kind of limited because that's a 3rd revision scheme, alphanumerical, combining both of them, okay? So that's how the limitation would work. There's no parallel approvals, and what that means is if you have something similar to a CCB or a change control board, but not fully a change control board, but require multiple approvals before a file gets approved. PDM Standard does not allow that. We don't have access to that same web client that we were talking about. Any of the automation here, so being able to automate your conversions as well as pushing information to your third-party ERP or MRP system, that wouldn't be allowed. Multi-CAD support, that's not allowed as well. So you see how we have AutoCAD, Inventor, Pro, and Solid Edge. So you can actually bring in those files natively, and PDM Pro would actually read in those references properly. There's no API available, so you couldn't have XBomb or you can have any custom programming involved, and that's exactly why you can't have like file conversions involved as well. Okay. And then lastly down here, in terms of transition actions, you're limited to the actions, and again, we don't have to worry about that too much into details right now. This is a lot of the functionality that's missing. A lot of these are bonuses, such as running templates inside PDM, having the multi-document preview. So in PDM Standard, you can only view your CAD files. In PDM Pro, if I show you a PDM Pro vault right here, I can actually go to, let's say, my sales folder here, and I can preview non-CAD formats. And this allows me to just take a look at Excel sheets, even full PDFs, or even PowerPoints without having to open up that file. Just quickly preview it through this window here. Okay, and then moving on, we can't have serial numbers. So you notice that my PDM Standard did have serialized part numbers on my assembly, just like my PDM Pro vault, except I had to do all of that manually. So it doesn't auto-generate any part numbers in the system for me. So if you wanted to do these non-intelligent serialized numbers for your part files, and if it's actually a really important process, then PDM Standard would not work in that sense, okay? You'd still have to do all of that manually. Down here, there's also a benefit that a lot of users like to take advantage of. This is syncing up your login credentials to your Active Directory or the domain controller for your company. So as long as your users are logged into their work domain, they'll log in automatically. So we wouldn't have that capability for Standard. And then the last thing I'm going to kind of talk about here is just emailing. With the database notification, we can set that up to have notifications through email, and none of the notifications would be available inside PDM Standard. Okay. Skip that, and then let's quickly talk about Hawkridge before we end the day here. So as we move forward here, if you start showing interest in PDM Standard or PDM Pro, and you want to move forward with it, we do offer admin training. This is a best practice recommendation. Admin training allows you to have the knowledge, the base knowledge, as well as the fundamentals to just maintain a vault. So the standard training is a one-day training. I believe it might be different now. This presentation was still from 2016. We've been updating our training opportunities and offerings, constantly. So there might be some updates. If there are, you can either email myself or Jordan Lemley, who is our product manager, and he can give you the updated information on that. Our admin training for professional, though, is still the same. It's on site at one of our office locations, and it's a 2-day course. I know Standard right now is exclusively online, but I'm not sure about the how many days it would be. So we'll have to kind of consider that. But it's definitely best practice to have your admins go through that. We recommend at least 2 admins go through any of these courses here, because if one of your admins goes, let's say, on PTO, the other admin could definitely come in and take the reins, make any admin changes as needed. Okay. And then the next thing we have is our autopilot. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the things I wanted to recommend or discuss with the admin training is we also do offer Pro online as well. It's not only on-premise at our office. We do have offerings online. So if you are maybe in a location that's a little bit further out than to one of our training locations, take a look at our online training. And we do have PDM Professional admin training online. Now, all of those online training I was talking about, it's not a pre-recorded video training unless you're doing our brand new on-demand training. The PDM Pro online live training actually pairs you up with a live instructor where they'll actually go through essentially like this, a GoToWebinar, but GoToTraining, and they'll do the training with you, and you can ask questions live right there on the spot. Our Autopilot is our in-house implementation program. So we've done these implementations for over the past decade, and we've done so many of these different vaults for all sorts of different industries. With that, we were able to gather a lot of the common requests we've been getting, and with that data that we were able to analyze, we developed our own best practices vault that we call the Autopilot Vault. With 2016 last year, when Standard was announced, we actually revamped our whole autopilot process to include standard, as well as just updating Pro to the latest settings. So it's going to be up to date and it's best practice. So standard gives you a pre-configured vault with all the standard settings, and it comes with 1 day of consulting as well, so you can get some customization that you would essentially have because you took the admin training already. So you have a good fundamental knowledge of how the standard vault works. The same thing with Pro. Pro would have 2 days of customization because Pro obviously has more features for us to work with. So you can customize on day 1, test it internally with your team for like 2 or 3 weeks, or even 2 to 3 months, depends on how much you need. And then we can do a follow-up customization once you worked intimately with the vault there. Now that autopilot process can get a lot of companies up and running within 2 to 3 months. And the fastest I've seen autopilot finish was within 1 month, just because they were able to dedicate time to the testing phase of it. But a lot of it is actually hands-off. Here at Hawk Ridge, we will do most of the legwork by loading up and doing the whole install process for you. So installing your SQL server on your servers there, installing the PDM servers on the other dedicated server that's provided for us, and then loading up and configuring the autopilot to work for your team. We'll even help out with any of your user clients installs that you need. That way you have a good testing team already there and readily available. After that first day of our meeting, you have a vault up and running you can use for either test files or even production files, though not recommended, but you can as a test if needed. So it's definitely a fast implementation process that gets your team up and running relatively quick. Last thing to talk about is migrations. Since we did talk about moving from workgroup PDM to either a standard environment or a pro environment, you want to discuss migration. So if you want to bring over your full workgroup vault with its history intact to any of these new vaults structures here, we have to talk about migration. Essentially, it's a process that we take care of Hawk Ridge, but we do have to scope out your migration, depending on how complex your revision scheme is, how large your current workgroup vault is. But it's a process that we will definitely help you go through, so it's not so much of a headache on your end. Again, essentially here at Hawk Ridge, we like to specialize so you don't, so that we can do most of the heavy lifting for you. That way you can stay focused on your own designs. So that definitely covers everything here. I'm going to open up and start answering all the questions in the question box here. And again, I'll leave this schedule out for all of you who are interested in attending one of these future webinars. I definitely recommend it for those of you who do have a SOLIDWORKS PDM vault already set up here. If you don't have any questions and you don't need any of the answers to those questions, feel free to sign off and have a great rest of the day. Actually, Jordan Lumley just notified me that revision tables is not the next topic, so I do have a mistake there. It's going to be synchronizing your custom properties. So my apologies there. This PowerPoint, I did not get to update it. I do have the wrong info here. So next week, the next topic will be synchronizing your custom properties between PDM to your SOLIDWORKS custom properties, okay? So double check that on the website I was showing you towards the beginning of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the questions now. Okay, so Jonathan Armstrong asks, what if another user updates the part file that is referenced by a drawing that you checked out? Very good question. So that's actually what I was going to show before my computer hit the RAM cap there. So let me try that again. Let me close out of this one. Kind of start this from scratch. So Jonathan Armstrong asks, if you have a file reference and someone else updates that reference, what happens to your view? So this is kind of what we would see here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this drawing. And again, for those of you who are going to hop off early, thank you so much for your time and attending our webinar this morning here, this Friday. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday for the next webinar. So here I have the drawing. I'm going to go ahead and check it out. And for your information, Jonathan, it doesn't matter if I check out the part or the drawing, whether or not I do a change of the part. What's going to happen here is I'll just do your exact request here. So I'll check out the part there. Now with this part, if I were to make a design change, let's just say add a fillet here. So I do have it checked out under my name. So we zoom in. Let's see if I can have fillet here instead. And then I update this design by checking into the vault. What's going to happen from an external user standpoint, so someone else who's collaborating with me, so it automatically syncs because I'm working locally, so it's going to be a little bit different. So what I need to do here, I'm going to get the older version. So this is what it would look like from one of your colleagues. Once that part updates, if they had the drawing open up, because that part's reference, they'll get this red icon. I have it customized to show a red highlight. That's not standard default. All right, this red highlight's actually standard default. The green one is not. But what this will tell you is that this file was updated. So you can see that I don't have that fillet that I just added here. So visually, I see that this part has been updated. All I would need to do from this standpoint is have ownership of the drawing, first off. And I can just say get the latest, which when I checked out that file, it pulled the latest version. So I updated my file with the latest version of that part. And from there, once I rebuild the file and I have the latest version, it'll update my drawing views to that latest part. And from there, I just have to recheck it in with the new references, and it'll update everything there. But you can see that it'll visually tell the rest of the team that something has been updated in the vault, and you just have to make sure you propagate those changes to the proper references there. Okay? Same thing with an assembly. If I have the assembly opened up, I would have to do a rebuild with that new part locally cached. Okay? Let me know if you need a follow-up on that, but good question. Okay, we answered Glenn Edwards. Gotcha. So we answered Glenn Edwards' question about the McMaster car part. Does PDM Pro have DXF export capabilities? Very good question. This one's a tricky one. So we do have DXF export capabilities, but it's more so on just your drawings. We can't automate, let's say, a flattening of a sheet metal part and exporting that to DXF. It just doesn't work because of all of the extra options that you need to kind of worry about when you do a manual flattening of a sheet metal part and exporting that to DXF. So if you want to find something that takes your sheet metal parts, automatically flatten it and convert to DXF, PDM Pro won't support that out of the box. You'd have to do some kind of custom scripting in that. But if it's just a drawing, converting that to DXF, that we do support. Let's move on here. Sean Talley, sorry if I'm butchering any of your names there, but can PDM Pro automatically bundle all PDFs created off a top-level assembly? So all sub-assemblies and part component drawings, allowing me to easily grab all the PDF drawings associated with a particular top-level assembly or BOM for sending to an external vendor customer. Good question. It won't automatically bundle those PDFs, but what you can do, and you kind of convert this using the admin settings, but you customize how you want it to convert. So what we can do here is you can specify your own output file path. So instead of doing, in most cases, I would have like a root folder for all my PDFs. You can actually have like a subfolder that dynamically looks where your current assembly is and do a folder called PDFs and locate it next to that assembly. So that any of those assemblies that got converted to the sub-assembly drawings and then the part drawings, they'll all get converted to that one sub-assembly folder for PDFs. And then that folder will contain, a, quote-unquote, a bundle of your PDFs there. So you kind of have to tweak where the file output path gets located, but you can do something similar to it. But by default, it won't like do a bundle for you, okay? No, and that was all the questions. All right. Any more questions for me? For Jordan Lendley here, who is also online. All right. So no more further questions. Again, thank you so much for attending our webinar here today. Definitely enjoy your weekend, and hopefully, again, we'll see you all next week for the next webinar. Take care.